I want to talk about for a moment about what we're wearing, what the soldiers were doing here, and a bit about this cannon itself. So what you see Jacob and I wearing, this is the U.S. Army's dress uniform from the 1880s, specifically that of the 23rd Infantry Regiment, as companies E and K of the 23rd were stationed here from 1884 until 1890. And these soldiers had a very unique job, as at that point Fort Mackinac was functioning as the headquarters for what was then Mackinac National Park, so our country's second national park, so very early on in the park's history. So in theory, the soldiers were here as a caretaking force, as the National Park Service didn't exist yet, there weren't park rangers. So in theory, that's what the soldiers were here for. But I say in theory because in practice, most if not all of their time was spent doing more soldierly things around the fort, like drilling down on the parade ground for several hours a day, going out for rifle practice and having fatigue duty, and yes, firing cannons like this in a form of salute shots. So that is to say, just blank cannon charges, no cannonball inside, just the powder to make a loud noise to celebrate something. And the Army had a whole variety of reasons to celebrate, as firing cannon is fun, so any excuse to fire these off, they take it. So they fire at least 2 shots a day, once with the raising of the flag in the morning, and another time with the lowering of the flag at night. They fire them off for federal holidays like Decoration Day, which is what you and I now call Memorial Day, or the 4th of July. And for the 4th of July, they fire a special national salute, where they'd fire 38 shots. That's one shot for each state in the Union. And what better time to celebrate the 4th of July than at dawn? So if you had the misfortune of booking a hotel downtown on the 4th of July, you'd have a very, very loud alarm clock. But nevertheless, it was an annual tradition the soldiers loved. They fired them off for more mournful circumstances, like the passing of a president or a dignitary. When Ulysses S. Grant passed away in 1885, they fired off a whole bunch of shots in the morning, 1 shot every hour, and then a national salute in the evening. Local occasions, like the first boat of tourists coming back to the island after a long winter. But for all these many circumstances, the type of gun they're using is very similar to the one you see up here. This is a model 1841 6-pound smoothbore field gun. It's a long, fancy way of saying that this gun can fire a 6-pound cannonball. With about 20 ounces of black powder, you can lob that ball upwards of a mile, which would put you from here all the way out to the shores of Round Island out there. Wow. But it is a smoothbore gun, meaning there's no rifling or machined grooves in the barrel to give your cannonball any sort of spin to make it more accurate. So its more effective range is only about half of that, which would get you to the White Lighthouse out there. But this gun would have seen a lot of service in the Mexican-American War from 1846 to 48, a little bit of service in the American Civil War in the 1860s, but by the 1880s, this is a 40-year-old antique. This is a relic of a past age. The Army had gone leaps and bounds in terms of cannon technology. By this time period, they had very modern guns that were rifled and breech-loading, can fire their shells upwards of 5 miles away, with a lot more accuracy than this cannon can at 1. So there's no reason to be using a gun like this on the battlefield whatsoever, which is why Fort Mackinac got a whole bunch of them. They didn't need the most modern guns. They're not trying to stop tourists from besieging the fort. They just need these to fire off that salute shot to make a loud noise. So I figure, in honor of all of you coming out on this very beautiful day, we might as well fire off a salute shot for you folks. How does that sound? Yeah. Woo! All right, thanks for that enthusiasm. The first step in the loading process is for me to take my thumb and cover the vents or the touch hole here in the rear of the cannon. Later on, this is where we'll set it off, but for now, I'm limiting the amount of oxygen that could get into the bore that could maybe stoke up any embers that might be left from a previous shot. Because Jacob's at the front end of the gun using our auger, or our gunner's worm. He's going to send that down the bore of the piece to try to fish out any debris that could be left from a previous shot. If we found anything today, it would have been some historically inaccurate aluminum foil, which we use today in lieu of muslin cloth, because muslin cloth is very flammable, and we don't want to fire off bits of flaming debris into Market Park and possibly ruin someone's picnic. Our next tool is the wet spot. This is just a wet piece of sheet wool on the end of our rammer. Again, Jacob's setting that down the bore of the gun to make sure that if there is any sort of ember in here, it is extinguished so we can safely load in that next charge of powder. It also cuts off air circulation. You hear that thunk? That's our cue that the gun is finally safe to load. It's about 5 ounces of black powder, which is a little bit smaller than what they were using in the 1880s. They'd fire off 10 ounces for their salute shots. But we find 10 is a bit excessive. It can knock paintings off of walls, which isn't great because the art museum is right down there. It can also spook horses. So for everyone's benefit, we've lowered the charge, but it'll still give you a good idea of how these guns sound. But Jacob's rammed that down to the breech of the gun, so now we can wheel it up into its firing position as it is indeed loaded. Now we have to prime the cannon. The first step of this is to use this brass spike here called the gimlet. Jacob's going to ram that down the touch hole, which will puncture the charge that he just rammed down to expose some of our black powder. And then he'll be inserting our ignition device. And we're going to be using the same thing up here today that they would have in the 1880s and even way back to the 1840s when these guns were first fielded. They're called friction primers. They're small brass tubes filled with gunpowder. There's a pin through the top with a friction-sensitive chemical at the joining point. So when you yank out that pin, it's going to spark, igniting all of the fine powder in the tube, shooting a flame onto the main charge, which will then, of course, set off our cannon. The last step is to attach a lanyard. So it's my time to remind you folks that yes, this is a cannon. You might find it a bit loud. Although most of the sound is going over the wall, I'd still recommend you either cover your ears or, as many of you already are, pulling out your cameras depending on where your priorities might be. We have 2 commands left to fire off the cannon. They are, hey, fire! Hey! Hey! This is Lieutenant Traffic welcoming you here to Fort Mackinac. If you have any questions, Jacob and I will be up here for a moment cleaning the gun. Otherwise, our next tour will be down on the parade ground in the center of the fort at 1:30.